Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for the time that we have together to study your word. We ask for your spirit to be here. We know, Lord, that the time that we're living in is a time where we need to be searching the scriptures on our own and together and praying and examining our hearts. And Lord, we ask that as we do this, that you will give us light, that you can give encouragement to those that are struggling. We ask, Lord, for a special blessing today as we look at Esther and as we know that many of the elements here reflect what's happening around us in the present day. So help us to understand these things. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. Now, in studying the Book of Esther, we haven't gotten very far. We sort of causally finished chapter 1, but we're going to obviously address some things in it. Now, there was a discussion that went on before we started praying about this, before we started recording, which has to do with the Apocrypha. And it's just, so I'm going to just note what was mentioned earlier is that if you take the 1611 King James Bible here on eSword, and I'm going to just share my screen so you can see this, it's going to start at what is chapter 11, verse 2. So I'm not sure, I haven't looked into this to know what this is. And then it's going to continue after you get to the end of 12, verse 6. It's going to have this, which is part of Esther chapter 1. So this black part here. So I'm not sure how the verses line up. This must be all part of the first verse.
They are.
Yeah, and then at the end of the book, it's going to continue with chapter 10, going back to 11, verse 1. And so it starts with 11, verse 2. And it was mentioned that this could be read in a circle. That is, that if you read the verses and you get to 11, verse 1, you could start at the beginning and go 11, verse 2. It's just a very odd kind of structure. So I don't know much about it, why it is this way. I've never really studied this part of the Apocrypha. So it's something I would have to look at. But we're looking at the Apocrypha because there is some information in there that Ellen White alludes to. We also know that much of the New Testament quotes from the Apocrypha. So there is parts of the Apocrypha that obviously are information that we can use. We just aren't treating the Apocrypha in the same way that we would treat the Bible itself. So some of this information might be useful. We're not sure, but we're open to look at it. And, some people might think, well, we're off base because we're studying something that's not inspired. But I do think that God has inspired some of these books that aren't part of the Bible. There are many books that were written that are mentioned in the Bible that we no longer have. And so why God gave us the scriptures that we have, God only knows, but there's obviously lots of things in these apocryphal writings as they exist today that contradict God's word. One book I'm thinking of that's very odd and a lot of people point to would be the Book of Jubilees, which has a completely different chronology for the pre-flood world, and all kinds of weird ideas in it. So, whether that book has some purpose that God has, I don't know. That God has for it, I don't know. So there are things like that we question the Apocrypha. And I know when I first became a Christian, I read a lot of the Apocrypha and all those other New Testament Apocrypha, the stuff that's really fanciful. And, I read through it and I just said, this is nothing like the Bible. But here in this story of Esther, there's maybe information that can help us. So we're going to look at those things as we go through this. Now, so I'm just going to go back to the King James instead of the 1611 King James, because we can't read that script too well, or the way they spell things, I guess, is mostly what it is. If you see it in the actual like black letters sort of style of things, it's really hard to read, the old fonts and everything that they use. So anyway, we have, we've gone through this part dealing with this, it's called the Akitu Festival, which began on the first day of the first month and ends on the 10th day of the seventh month. And we looked at a lot of the symbols. So we have this feast of 180 days and 7 days, and you can take that as a symbol of 187. And also from the first day of the first month to the 10th day of the seventh month is 187. We also saw that Darius became king on the 10th day of the seventh month. And there's some indication that even Xerxes may have become king on that day. That would have been the day that he assumed the throne. Some of these things are suggested by others. I didn't look at all the documentation on that because that would take a lot of time. I mean, a lot of the documentation that I went through to gain the chronology of Esther was thousands of pages. So it wasn't just something, I read somewhere. I went through a lot of material. And some of the things I didn't actually write down my sources, which I should have. Now, I do know that when it comes to the chronology of Esther, here's the chronology that I did way back. I'm just going to put this on one page. So this was a chronology I did way back. I haven't looked at it to see if it agrees with the chronology of the Babylonian calendar, but this is what I had done. And we're going to go over this and look at it and examine it again and decide whether it's accurate or not. So one of the things you'll see here is that Esther chapter 1 is in the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign, which of course we can find by reading the Bible. And then when you get to chapter 2, it's going to be in the 7th year. And then we're going to get into the 12th year of Xerxes. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things that are happening as far as this chronology. And so some of it we're going to have to go over and decide whether this is correct. So there's a lot of detail in there in the chronology, which I think is important. So it's going to take some time getting through that. Now, I also had the quote, which I was going to dig it up. I just didn't have time today. I always mean to, because I have to look through a bunch of papers. At least I can search them, because they're actually documents, of the quote regarding how the rabbis looked at the date for Vashti's refusal on the 7th day. And they say that it's a Sabbath day. So the way they interpret it is Esther 1 verse 10, where it says, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, commanded these guys, and 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty. So they take that on the 7th day is the Sabbath. And the fact that the Sabbath happens to fall in this year on the 10th day of the 7th month, I think is one of the keys, I guess, that helped me to establish that it was indeed the 10th day of the 7th month. And so it fits in with the tradition of the rabbis, but also fits in with the Akitu Festival and other information. And we dealt a little bit dealing with some of the chronology of this and the symbolism of this chronology, which I think is, just the idea that we can use numbers as symbols. And as I said, I think, this has been well established in our message for a long time. And there's this suggestion that we can't really use numbers as symbols. Now, some people may say I'm kind of misrepresenting that point, because if you read the declaration that happened last Sunday, they're a little more careful in their language and how they regard it. But from just talking to people directly, they're not as careful in their language, and they're more bold in saying that basically we can't use numbers as symbols, that that's wrong. And they reject many things that even can be established, such as the chiasms in Ezra 7 to 10 that mark these numbers as symbols, the 107 days being a symbol of the 10th day of the 7th month, and the 2 periods of 54 days as being a symbol of the 5th day of the 4th month, and saying that we can't accept those symbolism. So it's something that we've addressed already in the book of Esther, and we're going to have to address it again. Somebody put a note here. This is Stephen. Esther occurs on the 3rd, 7th, and 12th years of Xerxes. 3 plus 7 plus 12 equals 22. Restoration. And 3 times 7 times 12 is 252. Now, I, of course, think that that's not coincidence, because we know in the chiasm in the story of Joseph, which I did last night, we have the 22 years from Joseph having his 2 dreams to when they're fulfilled. So that period of 22 years, that's part of the structural chiasm, is obviously a symbol. And here we have a symbol of 252. So we would have to accept that this is something that is in the order of God. This is not something that we just are making up, these numbers. Now, when it comes to this situation, what was the issue in this movement regarding Vashti?
Trying to say that Vashti was righteous.
Right. So from a moral point of view, if you look at Esther chapter 1, we would have to argue that Vashti is a symbol, or not a symbol, but is somebody in reality who's acting in a moral fashion. Right? She's in the right, and Xerxes is in the wrong.
Right.
And when we look at then what's going to happen with Esther, we can see that there is more problems with Esther from a moral point of view, but yet prophetically, she's going to be in the right, and Vashti prophetically is going to be in the wrong. And now one of the things about this, because I'm just going to read a little bit here. So because one of the things about the Medes and Persians, what is it about the Medes and Persians that is the main characteristic? We look at Babylon is about the kingship, and Greece is about education. What is it about the Medes and the Persians?
Their laws, they could not be changed.
Right. It's their legal system, right? So, and this is an important point when we deal with, if we're comparing Persia with the United States, or Media Persia with the United States, what is it about the United States? What is its characteristic of its 2 horns, and how does that relate to this idea of the law of the Medes and Persians?
Well, go ahead, Stephen.
The Constitution.
Right. So you have this Constitution, and what is the principle in the Constitution that, I mean, there's a lot of principles in there, but what is the one principle that relates to the 2 horns?
Separation of the powers, for one.
Right. So the separation of the powers. So you have church and state, republicanism and Protestantism. So right. you have these 2 horns, and this, of course, is one of the symbols that ties the United States to Media Persia, because it's a 2-horned power. It's a ram. And And we know that the beast of Revelation 13 has two horns like a lamb, right? So like a sheep. So it has that same symbolism that we have with Medo Persia, these sheep horns, right? Or ram's horns. But in the case of the United States, this isn't separate. This isn't two different governments or two different countries or whatever you want to call it, but it's two different powers that exist. And the one is Protestantism and the other is republicanism. And they are separated by the Constitution, by the law, right? And this isn't a normal law, because normally when you have laws, the Medes and the Persians have these laws that can't be changed. And that's what a constitution is. It's something that you can't just change. It takes a lot to change the Constitution, where you can just have legislators, propose laws, 1 year, and then a new group of, I was going to say parliamentarians because that's Canadian, but legislators come in and they just overthrow that law and they create a bunch of new laws. And so laws are piled up on top of each other. What's that?
In situations such has been occurring in the United States, you can have a governor mandate an action, and the mandates are not laws. They are just instructions of the governor, and technically after a certain amount of time, they're supposed to go before the legislature to either have these made into laws or to have them codified. And that's not happening under this planned pandemic.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, the United States is kind of in bad shape right now.
That's an understatement.
I mean, basically, it's in the midst of a cold civil war that is probably going to break out into a hot civil war. And if Trump does maintain power, one of the reasons I think that he could do that is a civil war breaks out before January 20th, and that he has an excuse, I guess, to just maintain power. And of course, yeah, people have been shot and stabbed already. So, but, I mean, that can happen just on a Saturday night in downtown Edmonton. And we're a pretty peaceful place. So obviously, but these are obviously the tensions are getting very high in the United States. Now, so this idea of the Constitution is one of the issues that relates to the Book of Esther, why we can compare this to the United States. And we can also see that Xerxes here, who we have understood to be symbolizing Trump, that's the way that we look at it, based on Daniel 11. Now, I addressed this a little bit because somebody had asked a question about it, about the role that a person takes in prophecy. And, when we look at an individual like Trump, and we see that he's typified by somebody like Xerxes, what is the guideline to decide what characteristics of Xerxes are we going to apply to Trump, and what characteristics are we not going to apply? So I know this is kind of a bit of a turn with this question, but I think it's an important point, because we know that Trump is typified by Xerxes. But where do we draw the line, or how do we decide where we draw the line? Because are there differences between Xerxes and Trump?
Yes.
Right. So we know everything about Xerxes can't just be used and say that Trump must be the same. We know that there are certain aspects. So how do we decide what those are?
Do we compare what we know of Xerxes with what we know of Trump? I mean, I'm kind of lost in trying to put all the points together of this question.
Okay, so one of the things is there are things that the scriptures tells us about Xerxes and that just history tells us, right? Now we have mixed these together. We haven't just said, well, only what the scriptures tell us can we use? Now, what has the scriptures told us about Xerxes? What are some of the things that we use about Xerxes?
He's very rich.
He's rich, yeah.
He stirs up Greece.
He stirs up all against the realm of Grecia, right? So he's going to go against the globalists. And he's negotiator, right? So we can see that what he's doing in this 187 days is negotiation, right? Which is a characteristic of Trump. And Trump, amazingly, has negotiated 5 Middle East peace deals, which, you know, is just unprecedented what Trump has done in the Middle East, because he's a master negotiator. That's how he became rich, is he knows how to negotiate. He knows how to get people what they want so that they'll be happy. And he does a completely different style of negotiation than all these people in the past who have tried to negotiate peace deals, because they just don't understand the art of the deal. And that's something that Trump does. So we have these agreements. What other things?
He can be led by others to do things which he didn't come into his mind. For instance, he's led to divorce Vashti.
Okay.
And he's led there later on by Haman, right, to make this decree against the Jews.
Right. So even though, and how would we look at that as Trump? What is it that about Trump that we would take that characteristic and apply it? What's an example we have of Trump being able to be led?
Well, you're saying that Trump can be influenced, right, Stephen?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, certainly. I'm thinking okay. Well, I'm thinking concerning the vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the vaccine.
It's kind of
just
and so forth.
Yeah, the actions against the because, you know, Trump didn't really like shutting down the economy.
No.
I mean, if he had a choice, almost he would have not done it, because he doesn't like taking away people's freedoms, for one. But he felt that he was misled in doing some of that, right? So he's not happy with Dr. Fauci, or however you say his name, right? So we can see that. So Trump is very independent in a lot of ways, but part of the thing about the art of the deal is that when he doesn't have a strong hand or a strong case, he can sometimes give in to things for political expediency that go against his value system, right? So I see that on the one hand, we see this with this pandemic. Now we have, within this movement, said that Trump was going to bring in the Sunday law. Now, if that occurred, would that be in accordance with Trump's values?
No.
No, so it would be contrary to his values. So whether he's going to be the one that does that or not, if he does, it would be something that would go against his better judgment. But he might, you know, he might be pressured into a situation where he sees that it's an expediency, even though it would be something that he wouldn't want. And who else have we compared him to in that aspect?
I don't have an answer on that.
Have we compared Trump to Herod?
Which of the Herods?
Well, the one who had to offer up John the Baptist's head on a platter.
So Herod Agrippa.
Yeah.
And therefore maybe Ahab as well.
And also Ahab, right? Now, in these cases, because what's the other aspect in these cases? Who's the influencer in Ahab and Herod?
The woman.
A woman, right? So, but when we look at the story of Esther and you look at Xerxes here, is there a woman involved?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we have Vashti first, and we have to decide what to do with Vashti. And we've had some discussion regarding it. And we also have Esther as well. Right. But as far as the law that ends up coming here, so these ways in which he's manipulated, Xerxes isn't manipulated by Vashti. He's manipulated by his counselors to actually get rid of Vashti. So we have to try to figure out where this fits. So there's a lot of information. As I said before, when it comes to studying this, we have to have a lot of balls in the air. There's a lot of things that we have to hold on to and that we have to try to bring together. And some of these things we have a smattering of understanding. I do. Some of these things I've heard about. I haven't studied them in detail. And other things I know quite well in detail. So we have that aspect. Now, another aspect that we have is, does Xerxes win against the Greeks when he has this war against the Greeks?
He doesn't.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the history. I couldn't answer that.
Yeah, so he loses to the Greeks. He doesn't manage to conquer the Greeks. Now he wins some battles, but he isn't able to conquer Greece. So when he stirs up all against the realm of Grecia, the idea is he wants to conquer Greece and make it part of the Persian Empire. But he fails in that. Now, does the Bible tell us this? That's a tricky question. Does the Bible tell us about this failure? Because we know about it in history. The Battle of Thermopylae is, a big story, but also just the whole campaign against Greece is a big part of Greek history. But does the Bible tell us about it?
There again, you're asking a question. I don't have an answer for it.
Okay. Yeah, so the Bible doesn't really tell us this. Like, it says he's going to stir up all against the realm of Grecia, but it doesn't give us the result of that war, because that's not the topic here. Isn't about the war between Persia and Greece. It talks about the planning stages of it, because in the planning stages here, you're going to have this story of Vashti. That's really where the focus is upon, not so much the campaign against Greece. So I have often said, well, if Trump is typified by Xerxes and Xerxes loses to the globalists, what does that tell us about Trump? Is he going to lose to the globalists? But if we're going to use the Bible, could you not argue that is irrelevant? Or could you argue that it is relevant?
There's nothing irrelevant in the Bible.
I know. So the stuff in the Bible that's there, but the Bible doesn't tell us about the defeat of Xerxes in trying to conquer Greece. And so we could say, well, that's irrelevant that Xerxes lost to Greece, because the Bible doesn't tell us about it. And so it doesn't tell us anything about whether Trump's going to win against the globalists or not. Right?
Right.
So that's why I'm asking these questions, because I think there are some things that, we have to decide upon. Now, when we go to Daniel chapter 11, one of the things that we have is in chapter 10, right before we get to chapter 11. The angel Gabriel says to Daniel, "But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael, your prince." So Gabriel then says, "Also in the first year of Darius, I stood to confirm and strengthen him." And then he says, "And now I will show thee the truth." So this is what's in the scriptures of truth. "Behold, there shall yet stand up yet 3 kings in Persia," etc. And so in this account here, we have him stirring up all against the realm of Grecia. So that goes back to Esther chapter 1, this it doesn't even tell us specifically there that he's stirring up all against the realm of Grecia, even though that's what's happening. But we see it here mentioned. But then it doesn't say whether he wins or loses. But what does it say in verse 3?
Well, Alexander the Great then stands up.
Right. So Alexander the Great stands up. And so one of our arguments is that what it tells us here is that there is a narrative or a story that's going to leave out, Artabanus and Artaxerxes and Darius II and all these different kings that followed in Persia. And we're going to jump right from Xerxes to Greece. And of course, he's going to stir up all against the realm of Grecia, but it doesn't say that he's going to lose. But yet, is it implied when we have Alexander stand up?
Yes, and I think chapter 10, verse 20 also implies that as well.
Yeah, so, right, because it says, then he said, knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now I will return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. Now, this is actually a very troublesome verse. We haven't studied this. And I found it a little bit disappointing when they were studying Daniel chapter 11, that they actually didn't study Daniel chapter 10 in much detail. I directed them to some of the chronology problems. But who is the prince of Persia and who's the prince of Grecia?
Well, the prince of Persia is Satan.
Is Satan. Okay. And how do we know that?
I think it differentiates between the king of Persia.
Yeah. Which is Melech in Hebrew. And the prince of Persia is Sar, right? And it's actually the prince of Persia who's having this battle against Christ, right? So this is a battle between Christ and Satan, correct?
Okay.
Yes, right. Yes.
But then it says, when I'm gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. So if the prince of Persia is Satan, who's the prince of Grecia? And how come the prince of Grecia is coming? Why is Grecia even mentioned here in this context of this story, dealing with, as we understand it, that this is dealing with this decree in chapter 10 that Daniel is praying for, this decree so that they can return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. So why is the prince of Grecia mentioned here? So who would be the prince of Grecia?
That'll be Satan as well.
Right, it'd still be Satan, okay? So when he says he's the prince of Persia, he's talking about a spirit, Satan, who is actually in control to some degree of God's the one who sets up kings and takes down kings, but Satan is the prince of this world. So he's the prince of Persia, and he's also the prince of Grecia. But Persia is going to be favorable towards God's people, right? That's what's going to happen. So why is the prince of Grecia going to come? What does this mean? So when I am gone forth, and this when I am gone forth, this is a funny phrase, because Hebrew sometimes has things that are a little bit different. But this is the word yatsah. Does anybody know what this is about? How is this word used? I mean, I know you guys don't know Hebrew, so you might not have looked at it.
Is that to go out?
Okay, so see, Hebrew is kind of a funny language. Like, they don't have a differentiation between here and there or of going and coming in the way that we do in English, right? these and those. They don't actually have a differentiation between these and those. So if you see the word these and you see the word those in Hebrew, it's exactly the same word, right? But this I'm gone forth, this going forth of the commandment, that's when that word is used. When I am come forth. So you'll see this every time you see gone forth, go forth, come forth, the going forth. It's always the same Hebrew word. Now, there is sometimes it'll have the form of matzah instead of yatzah, which I'm not going to deal with right now. So they just put a different letter at the beginning, but it actually means the same thing. But anyway, the point is here, when I am gone forth, what would this being refer to? What is this going forth referring to? Because this is in the context of the decree. So there's this struggle being gone over with Cyrus. And Daniel is praying because he wants the people to return. He wants the prophecy of Cyrus to be fulfilled. And we're going to see that it is fulfilled. But in doing this, God comes to him, Christ comes to him, Gabriel comes to him and gives him this message. And so when it says, and when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. So what would this be talking about? Because he's going to return. I will return to fight with the prince of Persia, with Satan. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. I know I'm asking kind of an obscure question.
Okay, so in other words, when I have returned to this battle,
yeah,
then the prince of Grecia, in other words, the adversary is going to abandon the king of Persia,
right,
and come against him.
Right. So Satan, in a sense, is picking his army. And so once Christ defeats Satan in regard to the king of Persia, once Cyrus has yielded to God, now Satan is going to have a new power that is going to come on the scene. And this is extremely important. This whole story of Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes, and also the story of Xerxes that exists, and even the other stories dealing with Cambyses and false Smyrnus. These are really important stories because they actually fit within the reform line of the three decrees that parallels the reform line of the 2300 days. Now, at the end of the 2300 days, the reform line of the three angels' messages. Now, when does Greece show up, though, in this context? So you have the three decrees and you have Persia, but when does Greece show up?
About 100 years later.
Right. So it's going to show up later. And when Greece shows up, I guess the question is, what generation is that? I don't know if that makes sense to people.
About the 7th generation.
Okay, so I'm going to draw this on the board, and I know people are going to see it once it's drawn here. They'll understand what I'm talking about. So So what we have is this line. You got the three decrees. So you have Cyrus over here, and then you have Darius, and then you have Artaxerxes. And over here, we're going to have Xerxes. And over here, we're going to have Alexander, right? And over here, we had Babylon, Babylon falls. Right here. well, actually, technically, depends where you, I mean, these are the decrees. So technically this would be earlier. So Babylon's going to fall here October 13th.
You got the decree at Xerxes rather than Artaxerxes.
What? Oh, pardon me. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So there we got Artaxerxes. And Xerxes is under the second angel's message. This is the first angel or the first decree. And second decree is the one that completes the temple. And then you have Xerxes in here, and then you're going to have Alexander. So you're going to have Greece. Now, in this history, what else are we going to have in the history of Artaxerxes? Because this is under Ezra.
Yeah, you have Nehemiah.
Right. Yeah, so in 444 BC, you're going to have the fourth decree, and that's Nehemiah's history. And this is going to be about the Sabbath, and this is going to be about strange wives. And over here, Cyrus is going to make a decree, but Daniel in Daniel chapter 10, he's fasting for 3 full weeks. And then Gabriel's going to come to him and he'll have a vision of Christ, a revelation of Christ. And he's going to find out that there was also a battle that went on here with Darius. But here he's dealing with this battle of Cyrus, and you're going to have the prince of Persia, who's the one that Christ is battling with, which is Satan. Because Michael is the name that Christ has when he's in great controversy with Satan. But then we're going to be told that the prince of Greece is going to be here. And I asked the question, is what generation is this?
Well, I would be more inclined to set it with Darius, the prince of Grecia, because it's in the reign of Darius that there's the Greeks then attack areas or rebel against Darius.
Yeah.
And so it's because of that there that Darius attacks Greece.
Right. Yes, I agree. So I'm just putting him here because Greece is over here. And this is actually what I want to illustrate. So what God is not doing, you know, what Gabriel's not doing is he's not telling him that now I'm going to go to the prince, I defeat the prince of Persia, Satan here, and now the prince of Grecia will come. So even though we have Greece over here, and we can say this is the prince of Greece or Grecia, but it's going to be in this history that Greece is going to begin, right? So this is Alexander the Great, but he's not the beginning of Greece, right? So you have to have Greece over here. And you're saying it's in the reign of Darius that Greece has this battle against Darius, which we know.
Well, yeah, yes.
That's why Xerxes is going to have this battle, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So now, so this is Daniel chapter 10, and Daniel chapter 10 is going to be giving us all this history. So, but we know that Xerxes is still the king of Persia, but that the prince of Grecia is going to start before Xerxes. And I think the important point there that Stephen has brought up is that there's going to be a battle here and a battle here. There's more battles than that, but we'll just say that Darius has a battle against Greece. And so does Xerxes. But then when we deal with the scriptures of truth in Daniel chapter 11, we're going to jump from Xerxes to Alexander. So the question is why? Why does the Bible do that? Because we've had an answer, and I don't think it's the correct answer.
Well, I think it's been proposed that it connects with the end times to the periods we're living in now, so we can understand who the last president is.
Right. So we would just say, well, because this is illustrating the end times, God is just going to leave out Artabanus, Artaxerxes, Darius II, etc. Right, Darius III. And then another Artaxerxes II, and I can't remember the order of all those Persian kings. Right, so that's kind of the position that we've taken. But I don't think that that's the correct answer. I think that the correct answer is in this history itself with Darius and Xerxes. So when does the prince of Grecia come? Who does he come against? As Stephen pointed out.
Well, Darius?
Right, he comes against Persia, right? So Greece is going to come against Persia. Now, when we go to chapter 11 then, and we look at this, and he stirs up all against the realm of Grecia, why is he doing this?
Well, he wants to, in a sense, get revenge against Greece because of what they did against Darius. They defeated Darius at Marathon.
Right. Yeah, so part of this is revenge. And so he's going to stir up all against the realm of Grecia. But when it says, and a mighty king shall stand up, this is implying that he's going to fail because this mighty king is Alexander the Great. And if Persia had been successful, Alexander the Great wouldn't have existed, as far as, unless, maybe Greece would have rebelled against Persian rule or so forth. But it's kind of hard to say ifs. I don't like ifs so much. But the point is that this is about the prince of the kingdom of Grecia, and that is Satan, who is also the prince of the kingdom of Persia. So this is about this great controversy that's going on between Christ and Satan. And is that controversy going on today?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and so we know it is. And what's the issue in our time?
Who is going to choose Christ's character and who's going to choose the character of the adversary?
Right, and that's going to be manifested in the Sabbath Sunday issue.
Right.
Right. So when this mighty king stands up, we have taken this to be the Sunday law, correct?
Right.
Well, I would apply it more to the universal Sunday law.
Okay.
The 10 kings. So, just another point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another point you have from the time of Xerxes, there's 9 other kings that are kings of Medo-Persia that are not mentioned in Daniel 11 verse 2.
Right.
And so the next king is Alexander. So he would be the 10th king. So in a sense, it's another maybe a witness that Greece represents the 10 kings of Revelation 17.
Okay. Yeah. So you've made a point, which I think that we have kind of avoided, or we've not understood, is what have we done with all those other kings? Just to put it simply, what have we done with the kings from Xerxes to Alexander?
Passed by them.
We've just passed by them. But and the reason we did that is we say, well, Trump is the last president, and he's Xerxes, and he's going to be the last president. And that then, and Jeff had taught, whether rightfully or wrongfully, that Alexander is going to typify Trump. Now, as I've noted many times, I didn't accept that, even though I didn't argue against Jeff. I mean, I showed him my concerns, what I thought, and he just reiterated that, his reasons. But I still couldn't see it. But it doesn't matter, like I'm just, me, right? So maybe I don't see things correctly. And so I would just accept that what he's saying is true, that we're going to look at Alexander as being a type of Trump when he gets control of the United Nations. Now, so we can take those 9 kings, though. Can we connect Persia with Greece? So this is kind of another question dealing with the previous chapter.
Well, it will be, in a sense, America will be part of the 10 kings. So in a sense, Persia will be part of Greece.
Right. And we can also see that it's a world empire. And even though it's a different power, we could say the globalists are a different power than the United States. That at some point, the United States combines with that global power. Right? Whether it was conquered, it doesn't really matter. The point is, and in this case, Alexander is going to conquer Persia. So the fact that it left out those 9 kings, we just sort of thought, well, that history is just skipped by. But it's not, because we know that the prince of the kingdom of Persia is also going to come. And that actually begins in the time of these kings, specifically the 3rd king. And then the 4th king under Xerxes, there's a response. He's going to stir up all against the realm of Grecia, because Greece is already there. So when it says a mighty king shall stand up, it's not as abrupt as we sort of saw it being. And the fact that you say there's 9 Persian kings, and that makes then Darius the 10th. So those 9 Persian kings, those would include, how are you doing that count? Do you know the numbers of the kings?
Well, I know that from Xerxes, there's another, well, Artaxerxes would be the second, because you have Artabanus and so forth. I think the last one is Darius the third or something.
Yeah.
And then I think even there's something about even the Medo-Persian king Darius III was conferring onto Alexander as to being like the 10th, in a sense, the king of Medo-Persia after him. But it's a wee bit sketchy, and I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know those later kings. I'm just looking here. I'm not sharing my screen right now. Yeah, I can't. So that's the Archimedean Empire or kingdom, right? So Cyrus, Cambyses, Falsmyrtus, Darius the First, Xerxes, Artaxerxes the First, Artaxerxes the Second, Darius the Second, Artaxerxes the Second, Artaxerxes the Third, Artaxerxes the Fourth, Darius the Third, and then Artaxerxes the Fifth. So I mean that's more than 9. So I guess it depends where you're going to count from. If you're going to count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so after Xerxes, there's going to be 9 kings, and then Alexander the Great is the 10th. Here, I can actually show you this here. I don't know how well you'll see this. Maybe I can zoom in a bit. So here we have, they call them Bardia, but that's Falsmyrtus. So you got Cyrus, Cambyses, Bardia, Darius, and Xerxes. And from Xerxes, you would count. Now, we're not counting Artabanus in this case. So some people might dispute that. So there's 1, 2, and then there's a question here, son of Artaxerxes the First. So I guess it depends how you count this. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, you'd have to count that. 9. And then Alexander the Great ends up being the 10th. Okay. And so he becomes a symbol of the United Nations. So going back to the question that I had asked earlier, and I know this is a lot of preliminary thought, but I think this is really important to sort of nail down as we look at interpreting these passages. When we're interpreting this and we're deciding what characteristics of, that Xerxes are going to have, that Xerxes has, that we're going to apply to Trump, I mean, there's obviously things about Xerxes and Trump that are different. And so we're taking the things that are either directly stated in scriptures or implied and so we're counting these 9 kings that the Bible doesn't mention, other than it does mention Artaxerxes later on, but not here or not there in Daniel chapter 11. So it's something that we're going to have to consider. We're going to have to think about as we look at this. Now, to shift gears a little bit, when we deal with Vashti, what does Vashti symbolize?
The church.
Okay, so it's a woman, and it symbolizes a church. Now, Xerxes is going to cast off one church, and then he's going to have another church, right? He's going to cast off one wife and get a new wife. Now, Stephen has pointed out that this was something that was actually against his judgment. He was sort of pressured into this. So can we look at Trump as casting off one church and accepting another church? Have we ever tried to apply that to Trump?
Not that I've seen so far.
Okay. If you think about it, could we apply it?
Well, he says he's kind of like a Presbyterian background.
Okay.
We've seen him sort of go to an image of John Paul II and kind of like be very venerating towards John Paul II as well. So we can see influences there now. He's kind of like cozying up to the Catholic Church as well.
Right. So now we often make a case, about the evangelicals, and as a Seventh-day Adventist, who do we see as the main enemy when it comes to the Sunday law? Now that's a question that really doesn't have a good answer. But in people's experience here as Seventh-day Adventists, especially in the past, so maybe for Dwight, who's been around for a long time, who have we seen historically as the enemy?
Protestant churches.
Okay. We look at the Protestant churches. Now, why is that?
Because they're going to be the ones that are going to press for the Sunday law as an attempt to return to temporal prosperity.
Okay. Now, when we say the Protestant churches, are all the Protestant churches the same?
No.
They're very, very different, actually. You got evangelicals, which is kind of a broad category as well, because that includes lots of different groups. And you have Pentecostals. Sometimes people include Pentecostals as evangelicals. Sometimes they don't. But you also have Catholics. So what's the role of the Catholic Church? Why is it that we're focused upon the Protestant churches and not the Catholic Church?
Because the Catholic Church is basically going to take a back seat to these situations.
Okay.
They're going to let the Protestant churches lead, and they're going to be surprised at how much more strict the Protestant churches are than what they had tried to be in the past.
Okay, so and so we've had different scenarios. So I know in my experience as a Seventh-day Adventist, I've seen people that focus a lot more upon what the Pope is doing, and of course how the Pope is influencing the Protestant churches. The Anglicans are have warmed up to the papacy and different groups, and so a lot of my experience in dealing with the Sunday law issues is sort of watching the headlines, trying to read in behind the scenes of what the Pope is doing, what the World Council of Churches is doing, the ecumenical movement, what it's doing, how the Catholic Church has influenced that. And, but when you start to look at the situation that's unfolded, is it as simple as that, what we see happening right now? Could we have foreseen the situation that exists today 20 years ago, with the papacy and the relationship with the United States and with the Protestant churches? Is it different than what we imagined?
Yes.
And how is it different?
So far, the globalists are taking the lead in shutting things down and pushing for a weekly day of rest. And the Catholic Church is going along with that.
Right. So we see a lot of really weird things. So, I mean, you got the globalists who really aren't Christian at all, right? I mean, they're not a religious group. They're, mostly atheists and worldlings and secular people, but they're pushing for Sunday laws. And so this was not something we were looking at 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We weren't expecting that to happen. Now, part of the problem and part of the thing that's unfolded is we've seen that the Catholic Church has changed in ways we didn't expect. So with Pope Francis, somebody that actually accepts homosexuality, or homosexuals, I guess, maybe is a better way of putting it, who's also into social justice, which of course we know that the Catholic Church was, especially in South America and Central America. So the social justice issues that I grew up with my dad, I mean, those are definitely manifest in the papacy now, which people like Pope John Paul II was more conservative and definitely anti-communistic and anti-socialistic, where you see that Francis is more a socialist. So there's been changes happening within the papacy itself. Now, some of this is a bit of a simplification because it's much more complex than that, because there's different factions within the papacy, within the Catholic Church, and these different groups. And of course, Francis is the first Jesuit pope, and the Jesuits definitely lean more towards socialism and communism than the more conservative factions, even though we all often look at the Jesuits as the bad guys in the sense that, sort of they're working for the same purposes as the Pope, but in a lot of ways they were working for different purposes than Pope John Paul was, right? So that's why we'd have them talk about the Black Pope and all these different things, the head of the Jesuits. So here we have this situation when it comes to the woman, who could Vashti possibly represent as a church? So we have Adventism. That's one thing that Vashti could represent. But Adventism then would be, in this symbol, a bad thing, but maybe that's true. It could represent, the churches of the United States themselves, which in a sense, the United States is Protestant, but it could represent maybe Catholicism or something. I don't know. It's hard to say here from this point of view. But all I'm saying is that we have to sort that out. We have to sort out who Vashti is, and then what role does Esther play? So who is Esther? And so I don't think it's a simple thing. I think there are some things that we have to look at. So we know that he gets rid of Vashti. And then what's going to happen after he gets rid of Vashti? He makes this decree. So there's this law that all the women have to obey their husbands. And the same pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. And he sent letters unto all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. So what could this possibly represent? He sends out this decree that the women are supposed to listen to their husbands. What does that mean symbolically?
Church listen to civil authority.
Okay, so the church is in submission to civil authority. Does that make sense to people? It makes sense to me, but
take a look at what's happening right now. The civil authorities have shut down houses of worship throughout all this pandemic.
Okay.
And throughout this pandemic, it has been to keep people away from one another.
Okay.
So the churches have gone right in line with what the civil authorities have said to do. So instead of a woman that had stood up to the king and said, no, I'm not going to come in front of your drunken friends. I'm not going to come in front of you and those that accept your strange doctrine. We have a church that is submitting. We have a church that is saying, we will comply with your strange doctrine.
Okay. So we have a church that's complying based upon a decree. So that's an interesting application. I've never thought of it that way, that we could maybe apply this to the pandemic, that this is the submission. So what has happened? If this is Trump, who then would Vashti represent in that context? That he's married to, but that he's going to ask something of her that she's not wanting. And then...
Okay, no, take a look at this in a different way.
Okay.
Trump is, as the head civil authority, he is joined with Protestantism.
Okay.
He divorces Protestantism to take on a different faith.
Mm-hmm.
He sets aside Protestantism because, well, we have this pandemic in place. So now, as your civil authority, I'm going to set aside my relationship with the Protestant horn of this nation.
Okay. This gets really interesting.
I'm giving you an alternative to your question. That's all.
And so I think there's something there. I don't know if I've sorted it all out, but then we'd have to try to decide who Esther represents.
Esther represents the faithful in the movement.
Yeah. So this is another church.
Right.
And yet, how is Xerxes then married to Esther? And what does that mean? So there's a number of things that could happen. Okay, let's just kind of back up this story a little bit and kind of see where we're at right now. So we know that, Stephen mentions all the wives shall give is an acrostic of Lord. So one of the things that we have here is we have Xerxes. He's representing Trump. He's going to stir up all against the realm of Grecia, but it's in his planning stages of this that this occurs. And we connect it to July 18th, 2020. So we're connecting it to our history. And then we're going to say that that somehow in this, because this is not the Sunday law, it's a type of the Sunday law. In this history, if we're going to compare it right now, we're going to place it with where we're at. It's a decree, and it's a decree that Trump is going to give, because this woman is rebellious, but yet he's going to have the state, the husbands, control the women, the churches. And that's what we see happening today, right, Dwight? That's how you're looking at it?
That's what I'm seeing, yeah.
Yeah, which I think fits well. And then this occurs. Now, this is still a lot of preliminary information, but we're going to see in verse 1 of chapter 2, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. So what does it mean he remembers Vashti? How are we interpreting this?
He's remembering what went on.
Okay, so is he repentant?
No.
Okay, you're saying no. Okay, so he remembers Vashti.
If he was repentant,
yeah,
then he would have looked for some way to have restored her. But according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, those laws cannot be changed. So he knew that was out. That was not going to happen.
Right.
So the point that I'm looking at, I took a look at all of the names in chapter 1, and I'm trying to make sense of the names of the different chamberlains. And it's strange to me because most of those, the word chamberlain, if I've read it right in the Hebrew,
eunuch.
And also, what was that?
Is it a eunuch?
Well, I was going to say that the name on, as far as the word chamberlains is that they're also eunuchs.
Yeah. Yeah. So just another word for eunuch.
But
so what does that mean to you?
Castrated.
Yeah, well, I know, but as a symbol, does it mean anything? I understand. Castrated.
It means basically that these are impotent princes that the king wanted to ensure would give him advice, but would not seek his throne.
Right. Yeah, and also you have chamberlains who are a keeper of the women, right? So because they're castrated, he doesn't need to worry about them in that area. Yeah, so I still think when he remembers Vashti, and this is just a commentary. This is Jameson Fawcett Brown. So it says, on the recovering from the violent excitement of his revelry and rage, the king was pierced with poignant regret for the unmerited treatment he had given to his beautiful and dignified queen. And that's how I take when it says he remembered Vashti. That's how I take that phrase. Because, he was angry.
Like he was missing her.
Yeah, he's missing her and he remembers what she was like. And I mean, he's got all kinds of concubines and things. I mean, he doesn't need to worry about that area of his life. But, he wants to have somebody that can replace Vashti, because he knows he can't get Vashti back. That law can't be undone. And so, and he knows what he decreed against her, what she had done and what he decreed against her. So now they're going to minister unto the king, and they're going to try to help him, because, maybe he's a little bit depressed about it or something. So they just say, then said the king's servants that minister unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegi the king's chamberlain, keeper of the woman, and let their things for purification be given them. So this was studied in our message regarding this, but we weren't really trying to interpret this. So what are these fair young virgins? What would these represent?
Alternate churches.
Yeah. So
virgins implies that they're pure.
Yeah, they're pure. Now we also have the parable of the 10 virgins, right? So we know that virgins represent a pure church, right? So they're not just women. And there's all this purification that's going to happen as well. So there maybe is something here that we haven't seen before. that we can apply to the time in which we're in. Now, when it comes to Trump, he's Trump, right? I mean, he's extremely unpredictable. We don't really know what's going through his mind. But what is Trump doing right now? What's Trump absorbed
battling
in?
For his office.
Right. And why is he doing that?
Because he believes that the election was stolen, that there were more votes cast than actually would have been cast, and that there's been enough falsehood in this election process that the election should be overturned.
Right. And I think he's probably just in thinking that this wasn't a fair election. All kinds of rules were broken. It was definitely a lot of maneuvering on the parts of the Democrats to get this to happen. And looking at facts that I can discern are facts, it seems pretty clear that Trump has a justification for his position. But the thing is, Trump isn't giving up. And what does that mean about Trump? I mean, if you listen to the left media, it's just basically his ego. But do you think this is Trump's ego, or is there something else going on?
I think he's fighting for America.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Trump really believes in what he's doing. I don't think this is about him. And now, I believed all the things that the media said about Trump because, I mean, that's what you're exposed to. Until I started looking into it. And the thing that caught me, and I've said this before, is I watched his speeches and then I watched how the media reported on his speeches. And it was 180 degrees. I mean, he wasn't saying the things that they said he was saying. And then I started looking at his record of what he's actually accomplished. And he has done everything that he said he could do as much as it was in his power to do, unlike any politician. And this hasn't been something that has benefited him personally. Trump hasn't gone into this to make money or to flatter his ego. And even if you look back at all of his old interviews, he had no interest in being the president because he liked what he was doing. And people would always ask him, do you want to be president? And he's like, well, other people are doing the job and it's not the job I would do, but the country would have to be in pretty bad shape before I would become president. And I think, from everything that I've seen, he really does believe in the country. So when it comes to this pandemic, does Trump have regret about what has happened?
I would say yes.
Yeah, we can see that quite clearly. He regrets it. He regrets to listen to these counselors who told him to shut down the economy. And probably if he had just, flattened the curve at the beginning and then by Easter opened everything up again and had, maybe restrictions on just suggestions about, stay 6 feet apart and all that kind of stuff, things probably would have been a lot better for the country. But instead, he caved in. Now, of course, the media were pushing and pushing and pushing. At first, they were pushing against closures and stuff like that and actions. But then once Trump had done actions, then they started to say, well, he didn't do enough, right? So you saw the media change their story. And of course, people only have a 15-second attention span. So it doesn't really matter what the media said yesterday or even 15 seconds ago. It's what they're saying now that matters. So you see this change that has happened. Now, in trying to understand that Trump did something, in a sense, he made this decree. Could we see that this is a change of heart for Trump, where you have these fair young virgins are sought for the king, that there's something else happening? I don't have an answer to it yet. But it's something that we need to consider of what this means as far as what's going to happen. Now, for many people, they just say, well, Trump's going to be gone, January 20th, Trump's not going to be president. and of course, that's what it would look like. Whether that happens or not, I'm not, a prophet, and I can't tell you. But I think it's very likely that Trump's going to hold on to power. That's my opinion. But that he's taking a much different role than we thought he was going to take. And that he's not a globalist. Now, if Trump does lose, this would mean that he's lost to the globalists, and the globalists will be in charge. So if Trump isn't able to hold on to power, we're in a completely different situation than we had predicted in our understanding of Daniel 11, verse 1 to 4, or 1 to 3. So it's something that we, right now we're studying this out, trying to sort this through. And we're going to have to stop here right away. So my suggestion is, Dwight, I know you have a pretty busy week ahead of you.
I'm going to, but this study is important.
Yeah. I do want to spend a time on my own with the Apocrypha and look at things. But I'm going to definitely need your help because you've looked at this a little bit more than I have. Now, do you have documents you can send me to study?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if you can send me what you have, and I'd like you to present next week some more background. So right now, it's really getting some of this background here from the Apocrypha. And I want to look at that, whether it's going to take a whole study or not, we'll see. But
well, what I think I'll do, I am in the process to finish putting the Apocrypha in the place where they had it in the 1611.
Okay.
And placing it so that we can address this, kind of on a step-by-step basis, because there's certain portions that they put with each of the chapters. So there's going to be quite a bit for us to look at.
Okay. Yeah.
So, now
I want to do that.
Each of these chapters, as I prepare this, takes me between 2 and 3 hours to be able to put it into a Word document, but also, as you noted, I change some of the spelling so that we're able to understand it a little clearer.
Okay. Now, and the Apocrypha, the reason why we have that in the King James is that these are Greek portions of Esther that aren't written in Hebrew, that were in the Septuagint, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so it was in the Septuagint and ended up in the Latin Vulgate as well, because Latin Vulgate was translated from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's just something I haven't spent much time on dealing with Esther. I've looked at other parts of the Apocrypha, but not so much Esther. So Esther, Jubilees, and
I've looked at Jubilees quite a bit as well. Now, the point of what I'll be able to get up to you fairly quickly will be Esther 1, 2, and 3, and I'm in the process of doing the other chapters. I started actually on chapter 10 earlier today, just because of how much of the Apocrypha was attached to that particular chapter.
Okay. Yeah, and then I just want to read over this stuff beforehand.
Sure.
For your study, I want to go through it, read through it, and try to get it into my head.
Sure.
So that I can actually talk somewhat intelligently about it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I know this is we're really trying to lay down a foundation for Esther. That's what I've been trying to do so far. I mean, chapter 1 is important, and we can start to see that as we get into chapter 2, the picking of Esther, and then when we get into further chapters dealing with what's going to happen with Haman and all that, I think that we'll get a good idea of Esther and what it's about and how to apply it to our time. Because I definitely see that we missed things only because we hadn't gone through this history. I mean, there's just no way that you're going to see these things in Esther until you pass through that time.
Right.
And this is why, you know, even if Jeff was wrong about a few things regarding, you know, Daniel 11, verse 1-3, and the story of Esther, that's not something to criticize him. It's something understandable based on where we were at. Right? So we were at a certain place in history, and until we start passing through that prophecy being fulfilled, those details aren't going to become clear to us.
Well, I would place it in the same vein that Miller never completely accepted the Sabbath. And there are those that led him away from accepting the Sabbath, and it will be on their heads for that sin. And the situation here with Jeff, agreed. There's a lot of things that we would not have seen until we started into a situation like this. But as I recall, Jeff was at the forefront saying, yes, there's going to be this national emergency, this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, you know, there's so many other things that he has been so right on for so very long that I cannot set aside what he has had to say in the past.
No. And I don't look at, just like I don't look at like Miller made tons of mistakes. I don't see that. I see that there are things that he didn't see because of his proximity to the situation.
Right.
Where we can step back and look and see things that he couldn't see. And the same with Jeff. But Jeff saw a lot of things that nobody could have seen, except that he had a deep understanding of prophecy and a deep commitment to the truth and to find out what is true. He didn't have a personal interest from a human point of view. He wasn't in this for the money or for the fame or anything like that. And so when you look at Jeff and what he's seen, to me, it's clear that he was correct in all the basic principles that he laid out, and the way that he was looking at it was understandable based upon his proximity. And now we've passed through some history, and July 18th to me is a key that has unlocked so many things in our understanding, especially in its relationship to this pandemic, that it seems foolish to cast it aside at this point. Right? Because we can see that there was just some things that we were missing. And just like Samuel Snow was unfolding an understanding of his message that was going to be presented at midnight in the Midnight Cry, so too this movement has been making mistakes along the way. And Samuel Snow made some major mistakes. And even in his paper of August 22nd, 1844, he doesn't put the baptism of Christ as the start of the 70th week. Right. And directly contrary to spirit of prophecy. And I've argued with people who say that Samuel Snow is correct in everything in that document. Everything he says is correct. And yet there's various places where he contradicts the spirit of prophecy. So is Samuel Snow correct, but Ellen White wrong? And the reason why that they say he's correct is because Ellen White endorses him. But if she's endorsing him in every detail, then what authority does she have to do that if she disagrees with him? It just doesn't make sense. So we can see that she's endorsing the basic ideas, but not every detail.
That's no different than the situation with Uriah Smith.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's God's helping hand, but Uriah Smith had problems and some things were wrong. And it's the same thing with this movement. This is God leading this movement. But if you're arguing that the movement has to be 100% correct in order to be led by God, and that anytime we make a mistake, it wasn't God who was leading us, you're on really dangerous ground.
You're on enchanted ground.
Enchanted ground. Absolutely. And what you're going to do then is what the Omega has done, is that they don't make mistakes. Right? So, and yet they keep changing their minds about all kinds of things.
They say,
well, if they never made mistakes, they just deny the mistakes that they've made. And that's much different than what we're doing. We recognize our mistakes, and we recognize how God has led. And that's a completely different idea. We know we make mistakes. Jeff has always said, I make mistakes. I'm often wrong. But he's often right in ways that he never expects. And when he's wrong, there's always a reason for it. And so that's where we're at right now. So I think it's an extremely important to understand the book of Esther right now. And also the book of Ezekiel that we're studying. It has some really interesting things that are coming up that deals with other areas. And we've been dealing with things that are actually being attacked, like a 9/11. Definitely right. The book of Ezekiel has been addressing that point, right at the point where it's being attacked, right at the time it's being attacked, we're in the book of Ezekiel seeing a defense right at that very moment. So to me, that's very remarkable. So anyway, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we just ask again for your presence, be with us throughout this week and all of our studies. We know that we have a special Sabbath planned, an opportunity to meet with others who are studying like we are. So Lord, we just ask that all the things that we do will be to your glory. Be with each of us in our different struggles. We know that Dwight has struggles dealing with where he lives, and many people have health problems or financial issues that they have to address. And we know, Lord, that you care for us. Help us to be faithful in all things and to trust in you. And to know that all trials come through you before they get to us, and that therefore are good. So help us, Lord, to face these trials, to have the faith that we need, and help us to study your word and cling to your promises. We thank you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.